Looks like it's connecting. All right, my friends, I just pressed the Let's Go Live button, so let's wait for the stream to fire up all across the fruited plains of the internet. Boy, do we have a lot to get to today. And of course, we're skidding in here because the Kari Lake trial just finished, and it looks like the tubes have all been connected, which is great. That means we can go ahead and get started. So let's do it, shall we? Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gouveia. I am a criminal defense lawyer at the R&R Law Group, and we're located in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona. And today, we're talking about what else other than Kari Lake, the Kari Lake trial, right in our backyard. Shout out to Arizona. We've got a lot to get to. Now, I know many people were glued into our friends over at Viva Fry's channel, at Good Logic's channel. But if you didn't see all of the activity, well, good news. We're going to condense it down. We're going to consolidate it down and fast forward through some of the boring bits and just hit the highlights. You can see we're going to start off by going through a reminder, a refresher of our recollections to see what the two counts are, because these are everything, right? There are check boxes that Kari Lake has to check. She's got to go and click that one and click that one and click that one. And if she doesn't click them, then it's not going to be a success for her. So as we recall, we've already covered this previously. The judge is allowing two counts to go forward, count 2, count 4, the illegal tabulator configuration charge from Kari, as well as the ballot chain of custody problem. We're going to review both of those before we hear some of the evidence. The witnesses were called. We've got Stephen Richer, the Maricopa County recorder, the guy who really didn't want to testify, who was over in Panama. He was able to find internet. Weird. I don't know how he found it. He got on, cable satellite, beamed Elon or something. I don't know. But he got on the interwebs and he showed up via his vacation. So we'll listen to him, his sort of defense lawyer, the representative for the government, come out and apologize for the t-shirt and all those things. And we have it's a longer clip. We want to sort of hear what he had to say. Then we'll jump over to this guy, Scott Jarrett. He runs some elections here in Arizona. And an interesting part of his testimony was about the difference between the sizes of the ballots that were used. There's a difference between a 19-inch ballot and a 20-inch ballot. And if you use a 19-inch image on a 20-inch ballot, well, that's not really supposed to work that way. So he's going to explain to us why that could have been a problem. Then we'll turn over to an expert witness who came in from Kari Lake. You see this gentleman here, very credentialed. We'll hear some of his qualifications before we hear his big oomph of the day was his about 15-minute long line of questioning talking about the inspection of the ballots. And so we'll spend some time on that before he got a little bit of a cross-examination by this fella who is a little bit ornery out there today. He was giving all these witnesses a bunch of grief. He was saying, you hung out with the My Pillow guy, aren't you? So that means you're a conspiracy theorist, aren't you? Okay. So he was sort of doing that whole routine. Then we'll turn over to Heather Honey, and if we spelt the last name wrong, I apologize. I was getting in here for show prep, just assembling all of this on the fly. Heather Honey is a OS intelligence individual, investigator. OS int, or open source intelligence, however you say it. She is somebody who was working on the election. She was very prepared. She came in with PowerPoints that the attorney kind of didn't really use all that great, and she gave us an understanding of the chain of custody, which goes to count 4, which I think is a big issue, which is a big count of this whole saga. So we'll spend a little bit of time with her. I thought she was a great witness. Unfortunately, I don't think she was utilized that well by the attorney who was doing the direct exam. But regardless, she gave us some pretty good information talking about the flow chart that sort of shows how election day ballots work versus early vote ballots, and early vote ballots dropped off on election day. So we have those 3 big buckets that we'll be bouncing around with today. She also said that there's a big problem. She doesn't see a lot of receipts for some of the documents that came in on election day, which is a little bit of, that's interesting. Now we turn our attention over to this fella, and I didn't catch his name, but he was an election day employee, somebody who was in that group of text messages that we've already talked about previously. Remember, we've covered a lot of the filings before this day. But there was a group of text messages. All these employees were like, it's chaos out there, man. It's madness. It's bedlam. And so what we need to do is listen to him and see if we get information that checks those boxes for us that Kari Lake needs to check. Now, there was a very good cross-examination from this lawyer, right? And she's very methodical. I know this type. A lot of prosecutors are like this. And they just come out here and they just have like zero personality. It's sort of like talking to the sidewalk. But it's like the sidewalk. They can be very hard, right? If you hit your head on it, man, it hurts. And so she comes out and she sort of just hits the check boxes. And we'll go back into that when we listen to her cross-examination. She basically did the same exact thing with Mark Sonneclar, a lawyer in Arizona, or who was at least in Arizona at the time, who was working for the National Republicans Lawyers Association, who was sort of running around helping out with the elections. Very powerful testimony from him. But again, we'll see if it checks the boxes. And so, of course, as you can see, we have a lot to get to today, my friends. And if you want to join in on the fun, of course, the best place to do that is over at our community called watchingthewatchers.locals.com. You can see the web address is right there. Head on over and come say hello to the whole crew over there. Caddy did two's in the house. Oh yeah, we have some yeah, perfect. See, this is what's going on over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right, that's going to be a witness, sort of, that we hear from today. And I don't know whose face that is superimposed on there, but yeah, shout out to everybody over there. Dana36G, Zach Nichols is in the house, John McGarvey, and I think that's that guy. So yeah, that's over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And we're going to stick around after the show to take some of those comments. And so if you'd like to be a part of all that fun, come out and check us out, watchingthewatchers.locals.com. All right. And so now let's get started just diving right into this. The Kari Lake trial commences. Day one. Kari Lake makes her case that the election was a little bit questionable and should be redone again. She filed a very long complaint, included 10 counts. We've already talked about it previously. The judge dismissed 8 of those counts, just said, well, they're kind of relevant, but not close enough. They're not actionable. The government filed motions to dismiss. They said our elections are perfect. Everything's perfect. Kari Lake's a lunatic. And they were wrong on 2 of them. She stated claims substantial enough that the judge decided, let's hear the evidence. And so as a reminder, we need to be very cautious when we're listening to all these facts in trial, that we don't get pulled out by a red herring. We can talk about all sorts of explosions and all sorts of fireworks and crazy things. There's an elephant running around over there with a bazooka attached to the back of a raccoon. That's crazy. Well, that might be very interesting and very curious and fun to look at, but is it relevant to this trial? Does it check one of the boxes that Kari Lake needs to check? And the judge gave us a very clear framework and outline of what she needs to hit. And he said this when he affirmed these 2 counts have enough to go forward. We see both of them here. Count 2, as a reminder, the judge wrote for us, said, while the court finds that plaintiff, meaning Kari Lake, does not state a claim under one provision of the law, the court does find that she states a claim under another provision of the law. She says, viewing the complaint in a light most favorable to Kari Lake, who is opposing the motion to dismiss, it alleges that Maricopa County interfered, and it's not just Maricopa County, right? Not this idea of a county that exists as a bureaucracy. No. The judge said this: a person employed by Maricopa County interfered with the board of directors printers, right? A person, resulting in some number of lost votes. So therefore, Kari Lake is entitled to prove at trial these things. These are the check boxes that she needs to hit. 1, a malfeasant person was covered under the law, a malfeasant person. 2, printer malfunctions caused by this individual directly resulted in identifiable lost votes. So a malfeasant person, printer malfunctions caused lost votes by that person. And number 3, these votes would have affected the outcome of the election. And if you've been with us for some time, remember we covered, dozens of election 2020 lawsuits, many of them, and the catch-all that we always ran into. There's always interesting tactics and things going on. We go, that's a weird. There are a bunch of elephants with bazookas over there. But it wasn't enough because the judges always said, oh, but it wouldn't have affected the outcome of the election. In Kari Lake's case, of course, it's a pretty small margin. We're talking about 17,000 votes. But those are the 3 check boxes in order to prove count 2. Moving on, we see that in order to prove count 4, very similarly, the judge gave us a roadmap. The judge told us exactly what ingredients we need to have in order to bake this cake. Count 4, ballot chain of custody. It says Kari Lake next claims that violations of the county manual pertaining to the custody and the chain of custody of the ballots constitutes misconduct. And remember, in our criminal law analogy, we talk about chain of custody as being the transfer of an item. In a blood sample, right, it comes out of your body into an officer who is a phlebotomist. From the phlebotomist, transported over to evidence, from evidence into impound, then into the crime lab, right? There's all of these different maneuvers. It's got to go from A to B to B to C to C to D. And if there's a problem in that, it's a big problem. So we have a lot of questions about this with elections. Who picked up the suitcase full of the ballots and moved them from one location to another? Specifically here, Kari Lake argues that 1, the ability of employees of the county ballot contractor to add ballots of family members was a thing that happened, right? So these people would go up, they'd pick up the suitcase of ballots, they'd open it up, they'd put grandma's in there. They'd say, oh, it's just grandma's. I mean, it's just one ballot. Saved her a trip to the post office. This is in addition to the lack of an inbound receipt of delivery. So we're going to come back on that, right? Receipts of delivery, because this proves the chain of custody. When you are transferring one thing to another, you typically will have somebody, the person who says, I dropped this off, signs it. The person who receives it signed it. We both signed it, confirming that the exchange occurred. Now, they're tossing any allegations about the 2020 election. The judge said they've got a bunch of other complaints about 2020, but we're not talking about that here, so the court does not consider those. So these are the 2 counts, right? These are the check boxes that Kari Lake needs to hit. And so as we go through all of these different witnesses, the question is Kari Lake extracting evidence that supports those check boxes? Let's see what we can tease out of this. Stephen Richer, the Maricopa County recorder, is testifying on day 1 of the Kari Lake trial. Very frustrated with Kari Lake's lawyers who try to get answers out of him while he's away on vacation in a t-shirt, lounging it up in Panama.
Run back your personnel.
No.
No, they are a third-party vendor, correct?
Correct.
Are you the only county in the state of Arizona that uses a third-party vendor for intake of its ballots?
Maricopa County has been doing this since the 1990s.
My question was a simple yes or no. Are you the only county in the state of Arizona that uses a third-party vendor for intake of your ballots?
Yeah.
Okay. And
kind of
so
a weird
was
question.
Your testimony just a moment ago with respect to my question on chain of custody with delivery of Maricopa County ballots from your custody and control at MC Tech to Runbeck, a third-party vendor, that they are not governed by chain of custody laws?
They are.
They are.
Okay, so the question is, remember, we've got all sorts of moving parts here. So Kari Lake's lawyer is trying to understand the dynamics of how ballots go from A to B to B to C, from C to D. And here, remember, Runbeck is another third-party company, and so MC Tech will get the ballots from the locations where the people are voting, and we're talking about where are they counting the ballots? Are they counting the number of the total ballots when they get picked up, before they leave location A? Before A gives it to B, does A know how many ballots are there? Or is the answer no? Only when it comes to B, B knows the total number of ballots, because we want to see if there was a difference between A to B. And you can't tell if there's a difference unless you know the starting point, which is what started at A. So we're asking ourselves, in that transfer, literally the physical transfer from one location to the next, is there any possibility to identify a gap there? So he asks him that question, and the answer is that no, they also have to follow the chain of custody rules. Everybody in that chain does. The third-party team also has to follow the law.
Testimony just a moment ago with respect to my question on chain of custody with delivery of Maricopa County ballots from your custody and control at MC Tech to Runbeck, a third-party vendor, that they are not governed by chain of custody laws?
They are.
They are.
They are. And that would also apply to the return of those ballots from the third-party vendor Runbeck to MC Tech. Is that correct?
I'm not sure I follow, but
Chain of custody. Are you required to maintain chain of custody from third-party vendor Runbeck back to Maricopa County?
chain of custody is preserved throughout all times of the early voting process. It's documented when it goes to Runbeck. It never leaves the site of our personnel. It's documented when it comes back to MCTEC, correct?
Okay, so you document every transport of ballots from MCTEC to Runbeck.
Correct.
What kind of forms do you use?
It's a ballot transportation slip. It's a white form.
Does that include the total number of ballots you're taking to run that?
It does include the total number of ballots for early voting.
Well, what about the other ones?
That would include election day ballots?
Election day ballots are treated a little differently. If you're talking about election day ballots that are voted on site, those are under the domain of the Board of Supervisors. If you're talking about early ballots that are dropped off on election day, those all come to MICTEC first, where they are gathered, and then they are transferred over to Runback, where they are counted by our people at Runback because they have a high-speed counter, because that's the only day in which approximately 300,000 early ballots come in on one day.
All right, so we've got to make sure we understand the three different buckets here. There's election day votes. You show up. I voted on election day. I didn't have an early ballot. I didn't want an early ballot. I wanted to go there and see what happened. So I went and voted on election day. There's another category of people who obviously voted early ballot, right? So way before they're very responsible. They filled everything out, did their research, got it in the mail, and sent that in several weeks before. There's also the bucket of people that have the early ballot, but they fill it out and they just come on election day and drop it off. So we're talking about three different buckets, and we're trying to understand the chain of custody for all three of them. Now, in the day of voting, right, it's very easy. There is no chain of custody. The idea is you go, you get your ballot, and you just vote. You just fill it out, submit it that day. So it gets counted right there in the tabulator, and it's basically a done deal. In the others, right, there's all sorts of additional processing that needs to be done. Stephen Richer is explaining to us that on early vote election day, right, that one bucket of people who don't mail them in, there's a big bucket dropped off of those. Several of those have to go over to Runback because they can process them faster because they've got the high-speed scanners. And so we're following along as this lawyer is trying to tease out the chain of custody for all of those different buckets.
Okay, so your testimony here today that you, once election day happens, are no longer legally responsible for the ballots that are dropped into Dropbox.
Your Honor. Your Honor, wait just a minute, Recorder Richard. Your Honor, this line of questioning is calling for a legal conclusion from...
He withdraws the question.
Withdraw the objection.
He withdraws. Clarifies and withdraws.
Richard, these questions,
Yes, sir.
These questions are directed to you and your understanding. And if you understand the question, we'll presume that that's the case. If you don't understand the question, you can ask that have it rephrased. Do you need this last question rephrased, or do you remember it, sir?
Well, perhaps because that was a inaccurate representation of my position.
Okay, Mr. Richard.
Well, that
Sorry, Ross.
Mr. Glenn asked a question.
Mr. Richard, with respect to drop boxes in vote centers on election day, who is it that is responsible for those ballots?
Voting locations on election day are overseen by board supervisors in all 15 counties.
I understand
When
that. I understand that, Recorder. But you're not answering my question. Is it not true that the drop boxes...
So Richer is sighing there. He goes, don't know if you can hear that. Headphones users probably heard that, but it's getting a little contentious. Well, you're not answering my question.
are under your purview as a recorder.
When the ballots get back to MICTEC, the early ballots, we then process those, we oversee them, we organize them, we get them all aligned in the same manner, we count them, we then send them with our personnel to MICTEC such that they can be scanned and imaged overnight such that at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning, we could begin the signature verification process for those 290,000 ballots, the early ballots that were dropped off on Election Day. I was distinguishing those from the day of ballots, which are cast in person, which is overseen by the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors.
Okay, so the statute, are you familiar with the statute, first of all, that governs the chain of custody of ballots?
I am generally familiar with Title 16 and Title 19.
Does the statute draw?
He's getting a cup of water right now.
Drop-box ballots and early ballots that take place before election day.
It does.
Okay. Does it draw a distinction with respect to your responsibility to provide chain of custody for all drop-box ballots?
I don't follow the line of questioning.
All right. Does the statute requiring you to maintain chain of custody for all Dropbox related ballots say shall or may?
We must maintain chain of custody for all early ballots.
Okay, so now again you're parsing with early versus those dropped at a polling center in a Dropbox, correct?
I'm not attempting to. I'm just distinguishing those from ballots that are cast in person on election day. There are early ballots that are dropped off on election day. We maintain chain of custody for those ballots.
All right. Well, let me ask you this. Do you know if any chain of custody exists for the transport of ballots from drop boxes at vote centers to MCTAP on election
It does.
It does. Okay. So you can tell me exactly how many ballots left each vote center on election day that came from a drop box?
I can tell you how many early ballots we received
Okay.
on election day.
Okay, so did you hear the question? The question was, can you tell us how many left certain locations? He says no. He didn't say no, but he says I can tell you how many we received on election day. So we're trying to get that difference here. You know, if it goes from A to B, we need to sort of know what it looks like at A before it leaves A, so we can see if anything happened during the transportation. Right? Literally, in DUI law, there's a big problem in chains where one officer transports the blood and that officer's not available anymore because that officer could have taken that blood and put it in the microwave or something. And if we can't see what the transfer looked like, we don't know if when it came out of the person's body, if it matches, unless it is untouched during the transfer. So in this case, we'll rewind this just a little bit. The question is about, do you know what the numbers were when they left, right? This is part of the problem.
I can tell you how many early ballots we received on election day.
Okay. Can you tell me, based on chain of custody documents, how many ballots left the drop boxes from the vote centers and were transported to MCTAP?
Can't tell him.
Yes.
Based on documents that you have in your possession?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we'll see.
You're familiar with EPM, correct?
He didn't follow up on that? All right.
Are you referring to the Elections Procedures Manual?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much.
I am.
Okay. And that also contains specific language with respect to early ballots, Dropbox ballots. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And it contains the same statutory language as shall as opposed to may. Is that correct?
I can't recollect.
Okay.
All right, so he's going now into the law, right? He's going to walk through the law, and he's going to basically try to say, the law says you shall do this. And he's going to make evidence, introduce evidence, hopefully, that didn't happen, right? And so that's a violation of the law. Now, of course, what is Stephen Richer's defense going to be? It's that he's the county recorder, okay? He's got a whole team of people that helps him do these things. He shouldn't even be testifying in the first place. He's down in Panama. He hasn't gone on vacation in a long, long time. He just went through a hellish election where Kari Lake almost, just by the skin of her teeth, almost won. And he's, having to recover. So he and his wife, they pick up, they're going on a Christmas vacation down to Panama, conveniently scheduled the same time that a trial is to be held. And they said they've been planning this for weeks. So the defense lawyer comes out and is now helping Stephen Richer during a cross-examination and says, Judge, we're real sorry about the t-shirt. He's in Panama, by the way. He was probably out last night. Got a little bit of tequila left on the brain.
It's all right. We can move on, please. Yeah. Good morning, Mr. Recorder. It's good to see you.
Good morning, Joe.
you don't have to identify the exact location, but where are you right now?
Panama City.
Wow.
Well, all right. And so...
Oh, Panama City.
Are you on vacation?
First time in 4 years.
4 years.
And have you been busy the last couple of years?
I have been.
He's been busy, man. He's been busy.
And worthwhile.
Real busy. He started a super PAC to try to stop Kari Lake from winning.
All right.
Or a PAC. I don't know if it's a super PAC. Want to be clear on that.
And just for the record recorder, would you normally appear in court without a suit?
I most certainly would not, and I apologize for any breach of sartorial standard. It was all I had available to me when I was made aware that this might be a possibility.
All right. Thank
You were served a week ago. They don't have suits in Panama?
you, recorder. I'm sure that Your Honor understands. I want to ask just a few questions to follow up with what Mr. Blum asked you. First, do you have in your employee a co-director of the elections department for early voting?
I do. His name is Mr. Valenzuela. He would be more knowledgeable about these topics than I.
Oh, see that right there? Is there anybody else in your office who might be more responsible for all of this stuff? Yeah, the first question, he names the person. He knows way more about this than I do.
I do. His name is Mr. Valenzuela. He would be more knowledgeable about these topics than I.
Okay. And I know you're very hands-on, but you have appointed him to oversee the reporter's early voting operations. Is that correct?
Him and many others, but he leads those, correct.
Do you see where this is going? Yeah, him and like a whole team of people. I'm a recorder, by the way, in Maricopa County, kind of a very important person. That's why it's kind of annoying I have to testify here today. But I'm here, and I don't know much about any of this stuff. The other people are much more involved in this than I am. And so it's about what you'd expect, right? About what you'd expect from Secretary of State Katie Hobbs as well. It's a deferral of responsibility because that's what these bureaucracies are largely set up to do, right? That's kind of the product that they deliver is deflecting of responsibility. They're amazing at it. So after Stephen Richer goes, he had a bunch of testimony throughout the day, and a lot of it mirrored what you saw there. We turn our attention over to this guy. His name's Scott Jarrett, and he is an election director also in the state of Arizona. And he's asked about a very interesting possibility in Arizona. You know, have you ever tried to print an envelope in a printer? Have you ever tried to do that on a printer? Like you normally are printing your 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper. It's like, no problem. You're like, you know what I'm going to try to do? I'm going to be super fancy and I'm going to print an envelope. You know how that works out? Does it ever work out? No, never does. It jams in there. The printer explodes. You know, half the building burns down. It's a catastrophe. So you know very well what the problem is if you try to put a 19-inch something on a 20-inch or a 20-inch something on a 19-inch. Doesn't work out that well. And if you're going to be doing printer settings, printing an envelope during the holiday season, sometimes things can go awry. You will be excused for that mistake. If you're printing ballots for an entire election and you make that mistake, is it really a mistake or was there potentially some nefariousness behind it?
If it was printed with a 19-inch image on 20-inch paper and run through the tabulator.
The question is, sir, you test a lot of this software, don't you? Yeah. You're very experienced. Yeah, right? Yep. And you did a bunch of testing during the election, before the election? I sure did. What would happen hypothetically, because no evidence has come out yet, just hypothetically, what would happen if a 19-inch something was on a 20-inch something or other? Would that be a problem? And we haven't heard any evidence about a potential problem here. So this guy's sort of caught a little bit off guard. You can see it in his face. Let's listen.
On 20-inch paper and run through the tabulator.
Looks around.
You need to be more specific with your question.
So we talked about the ballot definition. And for the 2022 general election, Maricopa was operating with a 20-inch ballot image, correct?
That's correct.
And the tabulators at the vote center were programmed to accept and read a ballot with a 20-inch image, correct?
That's correct.
What would happen if the ballot on demand printer printed out a 19-inch image on the 20-inch paper and ran it through the tabulator?
We did not specifically test for that because of this specific election, because none of the ballots on our ballot on demand printers had a 19-inch ballot. They all had a 20-inch ballot. So I can answer a question about our testing related to the 20-inch ballot that was installed on all of the ballot on demand printers.
We didn't even test for the 19-inchers. Okay, so that means that they had the settings set for the 20-inchers. Knowing that they were 20-inchers, they were testing for 20-inchers. 19 was never even in the ballpark. This guy, I knew even think, what are you talking about 19 inches? What are you talking about? It's 20 inches. He's confused as hell. He doesn't even know what the heck they're talking about.
20-inch ballot. So I can answer a question about our testing related to the 20-inch ballot that was installed on all of the ballot on demand printers.
If a 19-inch image was installed, or strike that, if a 19-inch ballot image was printed out on a ballot on demand printer and run through the tabulator that was configured for the 2022 general election, would that tabulator accept that ballot or reject it?
Objection, Your Honor. First, this calls for speculation. Second, I think the witness just said he hasn't run that test. I
got your objection, speculation. I was giving the objection. So, Mr. Jarrett, if you've understood the question, you can answer it. I've understood the question. Asked how to rephrase. Or if you don't know, then don't guess. Just what you don't know. So, do you want the question re-asked or rephrased, sir, or you answer?
So I'm willing to say that I don't know specifically for this 2020 election. I know based on my historical, or the 2022 election, I know based on my historical knowledge, timing marks on the ballot matter, and it would need to be a 20-inch ballot to run through that tabulation equipment. But we did not specifically test a 19-inch ballot through the 2022 tabulation equipment because there were no 19-inch ballot images installed on our ballot on demand printers.
Yeah, it's like, you know, when you are getting a new TV or you're plugging in a new device and it's like, will you frame the picture to the TV, and you've got those little corners and you push the corners out to the end of the TV, sort of like you block yourself in, just kind of like I'm doing right here, you know, just block in right here, block down here, you know, keep expanding it. It's kind of like that. So if the 19-incher on the 20-inch page, you know, the tabs are all out of whack. So the tabulator obviously wouldn't read it. But it would be such a problem, right? It would be like such a glaring thing. They didn't even test for it.
Prior to the 2022 general election, did Maricopa County employ a 19-inch ballot image?
Yes, we did.
And when did Maricopa County employ
You did.
a 19-inch image just prior to the 2022 general election?
The most recent election would be the August 2022 primary election.
Oh, you're kidding me. They had 19-inch ballots in August, the August 2022 primary. And then they switched them to the 20-inchers just a couple months later for November. That's interesting.
Did Maricopa County perform logic and accuracy testing? Strike that. What evidence exists that shows the results of the logic and accuracy testing?
So he goes on, and you see he's a little bit sour that 19-incher conversation has come up there, because it's like, oh man, did we just forget to swap a setting or something? But doesn't feel like that, because we next turn our attention to Mr. Hill is his name, I believe. And he is an expert witness for Kari Lake. And he comes out, and we've got several different clips of his, including a pretty long section that builds up to the big climactic event. And we'll go through it shortly. But first, let's listen to his credentials, because he has quite a slew of them. And this went on for several minutes. I just clipped the first minute or so. This is Kari Lake's expert witness who's going to come in, slew of credentials, worked for Lockheed Martin, did all sorts of work for the U.S. government. Here is his background.
Just briefly go through some of your qualifications with the court in cybersecurity.
Yes, sir, I can. I have a Master of Science in Cybersecurity, which is on a computer science track. I also have a Bachelor's in Computer Science Systems major. I have the Certified Information System Security Professional certification. I've had that since the beginning of 2007. That is the gold standard as far as security certifications are considered. I'm also a certified ethical hacker, and I'm also a certified hacking forensic investigator.
What is a certified hacking forensic investigator?
That means you go in, you do a forensic analysis, specifically looking for malicious malware. You do root cause analysis. You find out what the malware was, how it infected, and that. These are not your standard forensics type approaches that most law enforcement agencies would use. Their standard is a little bit slower because of the evidentiary stuff. But if you're in an incident response center, as I've helped run in the past, when you have an emergency or something happens, you have to react then. And these are the type of action that you learn. You learn to get in, do the analysis quickly, make sure you're secure in your analysis because you have to come up with remediation efforts.
All right, and his credentials go on and on and on. He has a lot of them. He's worked all over the place for all sorts of big entities doing very intensive national security audits and analyses. And if you listen to the full thing, it's about a full, 5-6 minute introduction. But what we'll do is we'll fast forward through all of that, and we'll go listen to him explain in about 14-15 minutes really the big issue with the ballots. This is after a giant inspection that him and his team did, which occurred literally just yesterday.
Did you perform an inspection of the ballots on behalf of plaintiff in connection with an inspection pursuant to ARS 16677?
Yes, sir, I did.
And when did that inspection take place?
That was just yesterday.
Happening fast.
And without saying what your conclusion was from that inspection, did you reach a conclusion?
It confirmed my initial assumptions on the possible effects of what caused the technical issues. Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time we'd like to offer Mr. Kari as an expert.
Arizona doesn't do that. Basically, you can ask the questions and then it's an objection as to foundation.
Okay, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Kari, you examined the ballots in the inspection performed at MTech yesterday, correct?
Yes, sir. I was allowed to select the sampling per the request in the court's.
Can you did you have a plan going into that inspection with what ballots you wanted to select and inspect?
Yes, sir.
Could you describe that plan?
Through a FOIA request, the cast vote records were publicly available. I reviewed those, analyzed the data, and selected the roundness base so I could follow the course directions for the petition. So I knew exactly what to request because it was time consuming and Maricopa County was gracious enough to give us that time, so I wanted to use it wisely and make my decision quickly and accurately.
Do you know how many vote centers you were able to inspect ballots from?
I was allowed to inspect from 6 vote centers.
Were you able to execute on your plan after you went into MTech to select ballots?
There were some modifications to the plans because they...
Uh-oh. What's going on?
Modifications to the plans because they...
You say it was no longer valid, what do you mean?
The ballots had been retabulated for the recounts, thus Maricopa County was unable to map those back.
And Were some of the ballots that you inspected duplicated ballots?
Yes, sir, they were.
And what are duplicated ballots?
Duplicated ballots are when there's an issue with the ballot and it cannot be ran through the tabulation system. Therefore, it is duplicated, and then that duplication is run through the system.
And is that duplication then the ballot that is actually tabulated and counted?
Yes, sir. The way the process works is the original ballot has to have the duplication ID attached to it, which Maricopa did. The part that where they filled in the statute is according to the standards, that duplication ballot is supposed to be easily relatable to the original ballot. They said they could not find let me correct that. They could not find the duplicated ballot, which was tabulated.
All right, so we're trying to connect the dots, right? There's a ballot that comes in. Somebody spilled coffee on the ballot. Oh, man, like the ballot's here. Like they thought it was fine, but it's not fine. Like we can't jam this coffee-stained ballot through the ballot injector. So, all right, well, just give it over to this person, and they'll just duplicate it, like literally duplicate it. And I think here on this channel, we looked literally in MCTEC, which is the Maricopa County Tabulation Election Center, whatever it is. And we actually did a walk and talk right outside there when they were still counting the votes. And we could see there were people in there, right, watching each other, sort of duplicating things, checking things on the screen, and they were going through the process of duplicating the ballot, literally transcribing it so they could shove it back into a tabulator in a way that doesn't jam it up. So here the question is, can you take that duplicated ballot and correlate it back to the original ruined ballot? And where are the receipts? How do you connect the dots?
So you inspected the original ballot that was duplicated?
Yes, sir.
And do I understand correctly that under your understanding of Arizona law is that the duplicate ballot and the original ballot are supposed to be maintained together physically?
Yes, sir. That's an EAC requirement. That's
keep them together.
That's a standard when duplication is done.
And the duplicate ballot, which is the ballot that was counted,
yes, sir.
Was not available for you to inspect because of that.
No, sir, it was not.
Why would there be? Could you tell me again why there might be a duplicated ballot situation?
It would be because it was physically damaged. I did see torn ballots. They could have coffee stains on them. They could have ink marks, or they could just be improperly configured.
How long did you take to conduct your inspection?
We were there all day, except for a 45-minute lunch break. It took the morning because of not being able to track the selected ballots that I wanted to look at. We worked together and found the samplings, and that took all morning to get that sorted out.
And did you take notes contemporaneously with your inspection?
Yes, sir.
Approximately how many ballots did you inspect?
There were 348 that were set aside, and then there were approximately 25 because we did not finish because of the time restraint.
And out of that 348 that were set aside, how many were ballots printed from a ballot-on-demand printer?
In what I analyzed between the 6 vote centers, I specifically, and then there were the spoiled ballots that could be examined. I requested that the spoiled ballots be from those same vote centers. This allows me a more accurate response to be able to look at a spoiled ballot and see it's just the same ballot ID and the same actual ballot style as another ballot within that same voting center. The one thing that I have to point out is out of all the spoiled ballots and the duplicated original ballots, there were a total of 113 ballots examined. 48 of those existed because there was a 19-inch image of a ballot printed on 20-inch paper.
Objection, Your Honor. Move to strike as non-responsive. I'm not sure what question he was answering.
That's the 42% number. So out of 113 ballots, 48 of them were bad. She didn't like that answer.
It's your testimony upon inspection of these ballots that you determined that there was a 19-inch ballot image projected onto the 20-inch paper. Is that accurate?
Yes, that is accurate. That's one of the initial things when I initially were reviewing evidence that was presented and in the public. I saw that the ballots, and it was, to me, was easily identifiable.
And is this something?
And that's something that Scott Jarrett, the guy we just talked about previously, said they didn't even test for.
That going into this inspection you had seen evidence of?
Yes, sir.
And what evidence was that?
That was a photograph of a spoiled ballot right next to the reprinted ballot from a vote center, and that's included in my declaration.
When you say that's included, do you mean the photographs?
Yes, sir.
And so when you were inspecting the ballots yesterday and you determined that the duplicated ballots and the spoiled ballots, we'll strike that. How many duplicated ballots did you inspect?
15 total.
And out of that, and duplicated again means that the ballot was rejected by the tabulator for some reason?
Yes, sir. It could not be tabulated at either the ICP2s, which are at the vote center, or the ICC at MTEC.
Out of that 15, how many of those contained a 19-inch ballot image on 20-inch paper?
14.
14 out of 15.
What about the other remaining?
It was physically defective.
And when you say
it was
physically,
slightly torn.
can you explain to the court how a 19-inch ballot image, well, strike that. How did you determine that it was a 19-inch ballot image projected onto 20-inch paper?
Because these ballot images are a PDF file, which gets stored along with configuration settings. That's what makes up the ballot style and the ballot definition, which is created usually on the EMS, which the actual application that does the ballot style is called EED, right? That's the application that actually does the ballot style. It's usually installed on the EMS server. That application creates that style, the definition, because it needs those things because it gets loaded on the tabulator. That's how it's evaluated when the image is created. And that's the print job, to use a common term, that gets sent to the printer.
And how could, and how did you determine that it was actually a 19-inch image projected onto a 20-inch paper?
I can determine that 100% of all the ballots are rejected because the mechanics of a printer, the feeds are not always accurate. On the 20-inch ballots, you can see the same, I refer to them as tick marks, but they're actually the borders of the image that is sent. And on the 20-inch ballots, you'll see them at the very corner above the borders where there's any misfeed. On the 19-inch ballots, they were well viewable in the margins. There are 90-degree right angles at each corner
You can
of
see
the
them.
page.
You don't want to see them.
Did you physically measure the ballots to determine that?
Yes, sir, I did. I requested a ruler, and Maricopa graciously got me one, and they got one of the other inspectors a ruler.
Wow. All right. Was that a standard ruler?
How could a 19-inch ballot image appear? We'll strike that. You've heard previous testimony. Were you here for Mr. Jarrett's testimony?
Yes, sir, I was.
That's the guy we just heard from who said that, no, we didn't even test for the 19 inches.
And did you hear Mr. Jarrett testify that in the November 2022 general election, a 20-inch ballot was used?
Yes, sir, I did.
And did you hear Mr. Jarrett testify that it would be a failure of the system if a 19-inch ballot image was projected onto a 20-inch paper?
Objection, Your Honor. That misstates the testimony of the prior witness.
All right, so the objection is that Scott never said that. Mr. Jeter never said that this was a failure. You know, he never would have used that word because he loves this election. He thinks he did a great job. So it's an objection. It was kind of a poorly phrased question because it, you know, brings that objection up. Let's see what happens.
As to the word failure.
I'm assuming you're going to follow up with a question for an opinion. I think you can frame it as a hypothetical without arguing about
Yes, sir. in an election which is purportedly designed to take place with a 20-inch ballot image on 20-inch paper, how could a 19-inch ballot image appear?
Objection, call for speculation.
Let's ask a question first, yes or no, if you can tell. Ask him if you can tell, and then the objection, you can re-ask the question.
Yes, sir. Mr. Parikh, given your experience in training, particularly with electronic voting systems at 9 years, can you tell what the cause of a 19-inch ballot image being projected on 20-inch paper would be?
Yes, I can. I can give you both the technical ways that it could happen. There are only 2 ways that it can happen.
Perfect.
Can you tell the court the 2 ways that can happen?
One way is by changing the printer adjustments. That would make the printer adjustments and settings override the image file that was set. The other is from the application side or the operating system side. This is the same for anybody who ever prints anything at home. Your Microsoft Word can send the settings, or it can say to use the default settings of the printers. The application doing it, in this case, as it's a ballot, would have to be that there was a 19-inch image ballot definition.
All right, so something's happening. You open up a Word file, you send it over to the printer. The Word application is either sending over the printer instructions. It's saying, this is an envelope, print this way, put the margin this way, specify it accordingly. Or if it's just a default, then it's the default that's on the printer. Okay, so if the application doesn't send any specific instructions, it's just like, print whatever, I don't care, just get it on paper so I can use it. And they send it over to the printer's like, well, we got default settings here, I guess they're getting it on an 8.5 by 11, and it's black and white, baby, so deal with it. And it drops it. So now the question is, which one of those were changed? It was either one of the 2. Either the person who was sending the printing settings changed the settings in the application, or it was changed by default on the printer. Somebody did the changing.
And where does that definition reside?
That can vary depending on the system. But from what I heard in the testimony, it resides on the laptop that's connected to the printer, I've seen it referred to as a control printer, but this is actually what would be called a print spooler, and it controls the print jobs to allow the printer to take on the load. And as there were multiple site books, this would be the technical use that laptop should be used for.
Is there any way, in your opinion, for a 19-inch ballot image to be projected on a 20-inch ballot by accident?
No, sir.
Oh.
Why not?
Because the settings and the configurations and the procedures that are used cannot allow that. These are not a bump up against the printer and the settings change. There are security configurations. I've reviewed the evidence, and the printers are configured via script, which by any large organization that has to do multiple systems is a standard. This takes away the human error of somebody miscoding in the instructions either on the printer.
Just let that one sit there. If you miss what he said here, he says this was done by a script, which means it updated all the printers simultaneously because somebody updated them via a script, right? They went in there, they said, here, we're going to write this one patch. Right, because think about this. Like if you work at an enterprise, they've got 5,000 computers. Do you think IT, the IT department is going around to every printer and like, oh, got to do updates here today. Update Windows, update Microsoft Word, update all of these applications. No, right? They just go, okay, here's what we're doing. Security settings, we write a script. They say, beam me up, and they send it out to every single computer. They all get updated. Same thing's happening here. Except this guy is saying it's being done with an election script that updated all of the printers, and all of the printers got updated for the 19-inch ballots that don't work.
There were multiple site books. This would be the technical use that laptop should be used for.
Is there any way, in your opinion, for a 19-inch ballot image to be projected on a 20-inch ballot by accident?
No, sir.
Why not?
because the settings and the configurations and the procedures that are used cannot allow that. These are not a bump up against the printer and the settings change.
I'm not trying to print an envelope here.
There's security configurations. I've reviewed the evidence, and the printers are configured via script, which by any large organization that has to do multiple systems is a standard. This takes away the human error of somebody miscoding in the instructions either on the printer.
And the lawyer just let it hang. Still going. Let it hang. Let it hang. Yeah, just let it hang. And look at his face right there. Right there. He's like, yep, told you. It's not good. And so the evidence is pretty damning, right? That sounds pretty terrible. So we're going to come back to that. So put a pin in that. We've got evidence of a script. We've got something happened, right? Something got beamed out to all of the printers somewhere. He's saying 19-inch printers. There's clear physical evidence of this. Ballots that were spoiled and sort of set aside. He reviewed them, right? He actually literally looked at them yesterday. And so we do get cross-examination of him, and I didn't spend much time on it. Full disclaimer here. I was fast forwarding. I wanted to get the direct exam stuff. I saw a little bit of this because this was a fun exchange. We see Kari Lake's expert witness here, Clay Parikh, is questioned by the Maricopa County lawyer who asks about his association with the My Pillow guy.
$250 an hour.
That's also coming from the attorney fund?
Yes.
Are you familiar with an event called Michael Lindell's Moment of Truth?
Yeah? What's your problem with that?
You appeared and spoke at the event?
Yes, I did.
And where was that event held?
In Missouri.
Missouri. And was your travel from Alabama to Missouri paid for by someone other than yourself?
Yes, sir.
And who paid for that?
That would, I would assume, would be Mike Lindell.
Big Mike
All
did.
The travel was arranged, yes.
Very generous man.
And I spoke.
And that'd be true for your time? Did you also get paid for your time there?
I did not charge for my time.
And your lodging?
That's considered travel that was provided to me.
And when you say Mr. Lindell, you refer to the My Pillow guy?
Yes, sir.
That's very rude. Very condescending there, Mr. Attorney. Oh, the My Pillow guy. You know, condescending like he's some sort of a bad person to affiliate with. Seems like a pretty damn nice guy to me. And he's got me so fired up right now, it got me thinking about 4 Patriots, thinking about Mike Lindell. And I want to share with you, my friends, a very important message from our sponsors over at 4patriots.com. My friends, a food shortage could be coming. Even in the United States, experts have written about this as recently as July. Drought, inflation, even new policies are pushing America's food supply near its breaking point. That's why survival food is more important now than ever. And you can create your own stockpile of the best-selling 4 Patriot survival food kits ever. This is not ordinary food. We're talking about good for 25 years super survival food, hand-packed right in family-owned facilities in the United States, giving jobs to over 200 Americans. The kits are compact, they're sturdy, they're water-resistant, and they stack easily. They have different delicious breakfast, lunches, and dinners, and you can make these meals in less than 20 minutes. Just add boiling water, simmer, and serve. And right now, you can go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off your first purchase on anything in the store, including this 3-month survival kit. You'll get their famous guarantee for an entire year after your order, plus free shipping on orders over $97. They're called 4 Patriots because a portion of every sale is donated to charities who support our veterans and their families. Go to 4patriots.com. Use code Robert to get 10% off. That's 4patriots.com. Use code Robert. Start building your own stockpile today. That's right, my friends. Go over there to 4patriots.com. Get your solar panels. Get your survival food. Make sure that you survive out there. We want you to live long and healthy lives. Okay, so that is an update on our friend Clay Parikh is his name. It's not Hank Hill from that one TV show. But he dropped the bombshell on us. He said, wow, okay, so we look now at the printers. They are evidently dropping 19-inch images on 20-inch ballots, causing all sorts of issues to percolate on election day. And it's a pretty damning state of testimony. Now, as we carry on and move through the show, we see that we have another witness who is presented. Her name is Heather Honey. Heather Honey is an investigator. She's an auditor. She is somebody who also worked on chain of custody, because remember, we've got those two counts that are still moving forward. One is about the chain of custody. A to B to B to C, C to D, follow the bouncing ball. And as we do that, we have somebody who says there may have been some problems in that process. Let's learn a little bit more about Heather Honey. She tells us about her analysis and her involvement. And here is what she says for us here today about her background.
Explain to this court how you became knowledgeable about Arizona elections as it relates specifically to the issue of chain of custody.
Yeah, so, obviously the idea here, I mean, I do like vulnerability assessments, I do supply chain consulting, so what you're looking for, right, is researching what are the vulnerabilities in the election system, for example. And so one of the areas that we looked at was the Dropbox chain of custody. And the election procedure manual specifically has guidelines starting on page 61, item number 7. There are about 8 specific requirements that the recorder is required to do regarding the chain of custody of Dropbox ballots. So in addition to the EPM, when we were researching this, we spoke with representatives who had actually participated in the process. We talked to ballot couriers who had actually retrieved ballots from Dropboxes. We spoke with Celia in the Maricopa County Elections Department. She was very helpful. She provided a lot of really useful information in terms of their process. The EPM is sort of the guideline for the entire state, but how each county implements the process is different. For example, we did research and investigations into the chain of custody in a couple of elections in Arizona, several in Maricopa, but we also looked at the process in Pima County as well.
Okay. So you've spent a great deal of time talking to people in Arizona that actually work in the elections department?
Yes.
That actually work at Runbeck?
I spoke with Jeff Ellington about, I'm going to say nearly a year ago or so, and he was able to answer a bunch of questions that I had about how Runbeck works. Jeff Ellington is the CEO of Runbeck, and recently I had the opportunity to talk to a Runbeck employee who provided a declaration in this case.
Okay. And you also have the opportunity to work with other election integrity experts and attorneys?
Yes.
In the state of Arizona? All right. And so
a lot of experience. You can see this woman ran all over the place, speaking to everybody. She brought a PowerPoint with her, and she was very prepared for her testimony. And she even explained the complexity of the chain of custody process. Now, this came later in her testimony, and I was a little bit sort of annoyed with the methodology of the direct examination. My understanding is she came in with a whole set of slides, and they didn't go through the slides uniformly. So the attorney was sort of bouncing around asking her these questions. And there's one point in this, I did not clip it here today, where she actually told him, she's like, well, it's in the slides. Like it's in the slides, you know? And so she's sort of bouncing around. So what I did is I clipped this and I brought it to the front because I think this should have been first, actually. It shows the complexity of how chain of custody works in Arizona.
Explain to the court what this all means.
Yeah, so this is a diagram of Maricopa County ballot chain of custody from the voter to tabulation. And so what you notice is if you vote on election day, you put your ballot in the tabulator. But if you vote early in person in Maricopa, or if you vote by mail, there are several transfers of the ballot and therefore requirements for chain of custody. And what's interesting or unique about Maricopa County is, to my knowledge, they are one of the only counties in the country that outsources the intake or the receipt of their ballots to a third-party organization. So, for example, we talked
one of the only counties in the country. Wow.
About the EPM and the requirement for chain of custody from the Dropbox to the county. In most counties, that's the end of the road. You retrieve the ballot from the Dropbox, you transport it securely to the county, and it's tabulated there. That's not the case in Maricopa County. In Maricopa County, they then have to, after they've received it in the county and processed it according to the Arizona law, then they must again maintain secure chain of custody as they transfer it from Maricopa County to Runbeck, and then again when it comes back the other way.
All right, so that's the bouncing ball, and that's pretty complicated, right? If I had my red highlighter right now, if I had my marker, my digital Sharpie, boy, we'd be marking this up like crazy here. You can see in Election Day, it is voter to tabulation. That's exactly what I did. That's exactly why I went in there and voted on Election Day. I wanted it to go right in there, and I wanted to see it. And I didn't have to use the backdoor ballot 3, very fortunately. Now here you can see early in-person and Dropbox voting, voter to the Dropbox, Dropbox to the ballot counter, courier to the courier, right? The person who's picking up the DoorDash delivery. Then the courier goes over to MTech, which then is to the transport truck, which then goes over to Runbeck. They have the high-speed scanner, then back over to the transport truck, then back over to tabulation, right? That's 6 transfers. Holy moly, that's a lot. And so the question becomes, if you follow the bouncing ball and you don't know how many there were in terms of who left, right? Or how many were picked up at one location. I guess in other words, you could go from a Dropbox, which was being monitored, to a ballot courier who maybe is not being monitored or whatever, right? Hypothetically. And they could just drop them off at MCTech, and MCTech would be the only time and location that they would be counting the votes because that's when they received them, right? That's what Stephen Richer already told us, that when they get them, they count them. But when they're at the Dropbox, they don't count them because how could they? Now, Stephen Richer, I think, actually misspoke on that, and I don't know if that came up again, but the point is we're trying to identify receipts, and we're going to hear from Miss Honey in a minute that she doesn't really have them because Maricopa County is unwilling to provide them.
Ballot and therefore requirements for chain of custody.
So that we listen to that, let's listen here now to the Election Day documents conversation. So the question that comes to her is about these receipts, about these transfers, tracking the chain of custody. This attorney is asking her about the documents, and he's going down a different line of questioning, and she sort of blurts out of nowhere, yeah, but election day. She keeps trying to come back to this point. Let's listen.
Do you have any problems with any of the early ballot transport statements that you reviewed for the beginning of early voting until election day?
No, I think that they actually, compared to previous elections, they did a really, significantly better job with the documents this time around.
That's not a great answer.
But again, there were no documents produced for Election Day, which amounted to a significant number of Dropbox ballots.
All right, and so let's go back a little bit to talk a little bit more about your history as we sort of go through this.
See, so this is where it got weird. She's asked, she really wants to talk about this Election Day stuff. And finally she does. He finally draws that question out. He kind of saves it for the end. This is the big question. Did you get the documents showing chain of custody for the Maricopa County election?
Do you have all of Maricopa County delivery receipt documents?
We do not have any. We requested them, but they said they had misplaced them.
What?
And those are the ones that were for election day, correct?
Well, actually, we didn't get a single one of those for the entire election. It is the testimony of in the declaration of the Runbeck employees that no such documents existed for Election Day.
For election day.
No documents. They didn't track them. They didn't have them. There is no evidence of them, according to one employee. According to Maricopa County, according to this woman, Miss Honey, she says they misplaced them.
Right.
Okay, what about prior to the election?
Yeah, so this form was actually created for all of the days prior to Election Day.
And I'm sorry, but my question was specifically related to election day.
Yikes.
There,
It's your witness.
There were none.
well, we did not receive any. They said they misplaced them, and the Runbeck employees said none existed.
Okay. All right.
All right. So, yeah, not a real great, I mean, excellent witness, not a great presentation of the facts. But the point here is that there is no chain of custody, evidently. She said twice there were no Election Day documents showing receipts for some of these things. Okay, so if we do a quick recap on this, well, what do we have? We see that we've got some pretty interesting revelations from our friend Clay. Clay tells us that the inspection of the ballots is revealing that they were, according to him, right, the settings were intentionally changed, causing a major problem that resulted in ballots being printed literally at wrong sizes. Scott Jarrett says they weren't even testing for it. Stephen Richer says that he's not responsible for any of this, and he's in Panama anyways, and so what does he care? But now we turn our attention over to the election day mechanics, because we need to know who was in there, right? Remember that the checkboxes talk about a person or some actor who is doing these things, and so we got to see that somewhere. We turn our attention over to this election day employee. He's called to the stand. Of course, this is still Kari Lake's case in chief. It's her witness. And they start asking him questions about the chaos. In Maricopa County on election day, people are running around like they're chickens with their heads cut off, man. It's madness. Nobody knows what's going on with the printers. This gentleman has been dispatched to go out there and fix the problems. Here's what he said he experienced.
54 pages of text messages. Do you recognize this document, sir?
Absolutely, yes.
And what is it?
It's the group text from that day, the election day.
And is this a group text chats from your phone?
Yes, yes, sir.
And did you provide a declaration in this case?
Yes.
And you swore under oath under the penalty of perjury to tell the truth, correct?
Absolutely correct.
And did you, in connection with this declaration, provide screenshots of your text messages with the other T-texts, the other 15 T-texts that day?
Yes, correct.
Do you believe this to be, and you can scroll through some, and does this appear to be a true and accurate copy of your text messages?
Yes, sir, it does. There were a lot of issues that came up throughout the day, and including at times T-Tex would say that the ballots look pristine, but the tabulators aren't reading them, so that would really not have to do with the printers from our point of view. And that wasn't just one person, there were others that said similar things.
Do these text messages represent communications that...
So just to give you a quick understanding of what's on the text messages, Mike Duffy says, we are running about 50% acceptance. That's at 8:52 in the morning, November 8th. Mike Duffy says, lots of misreads. That's in capital letters. Lisa Jenkins is in the house, says, a provisional vote did not get a receipt. Printed voter is waiting. Please advise. Uh-oh. Inspector from Tempe and Mountain Park Health Center called me. Rachel T-Tech says tabulator is not accepting overvote, even though they are using the override button. Uh-oh, that was a problem. You see a couple other text messages. Here they say, we had one ballot that didn't say ballot successfully read in the tabulator, but the tabulator took it through. Well, that's weird. First Baptist Chandler says that they were misreading before, but this is different. I saw it myself and so did the voter. That's weird. Somebody says one ballot successfully read in the tabulator. It took it, but it didn't say successfully read. That's okay. It's probably a Kari Lake vote, and it probably just went into the shredder instead. Mike Duffy said Cave Creek tabulators are once again rejecting ballots that look absolutely pristine to me. Well, the problem is, Mike, is that it's got the Kari Lake checkbox marked. Mike Duffy says we're running at about 50% compliance. Another one here. We had an issue where a tabulator saying assistance is required. This is at 7:51. Hotline had us follow the inspector handbook to open the door and clear the jam. Now it's working fine. Somebody else says, we're getting some ballot misleads. Cave Creek is up and running. Tabulators aren't reading ballots. It's maybe 50-50, says another person. Mike says, change the toner printer. It's printing less than perfectly. Rachel at 6:40 in the morning is over at the highway. We're having the same issues. Am I allowed to look at a ballot? We're having issues with tabulators reading ballots marked with blue ink, says somebody else. They're being spoiled and having voters. It's chaos. Rachel says at 6:19, ditto. Voting booths with bottleneck at booths and printer area lines out the door at 6:18. Guess who's there voting at 6:18 in the morning on election day? Guess who those voters are? Kari Lake voters. You're right. Brett Cole said all our voting booths are full at Mountain View Community Center. Yeah, interesting. Well, it feels like an accident, huh? Agree. People for the booth tabulators very picky. Lots of rejects here. 3463 says I'm having a 911 at 6:26 a.m. Absolute catastrophe. All of them are problematic. Cottonwood, 90%, 80%, 50%. The misreads greatly increased on one tabulator. Scrubbed out the printer toner, shook the toner, still a few specks in. Did you clean the Corona wire? Says Cave Creek is sending out all voters to other locations. How many of those voters do you think actually went to other locations? If you're there on election day, you're like, yeah, you know, look, I came to vote. Kari Lake's going to win anyways. All right, I guess I'll just go back into work. Right? So all of that is on election day. Now, this gentleman is explaining it, and we're going to hear where this goes.
You'll see, Your Honor, it says I'm having a 911. I would say that there are a number of, as you just can scroll through, these would classify or qualify as either excited utterance or present sense impression.
So here's the conversation that's taking place here. Now, there's one gentleman who's in court testifying, but all of these are other conversations, right? This is hearsay. These are statements made outside of court. And so we don't have Rachel T-Tech testifying. Presumably, we don't have Brett Cole. I don't know the name of the gentleman who's testifying right now, or Mike Duffy, but these are his techs. So I think that would mean he's on this side. So he's this guy, right? He's the blue one here. So Mike Duffy's not testifying. Rachel's not testifying. Brett Cole's not testifying. 3463 is not testifying. So how can we get their statements in, their testimony? Well, there are exceptions to hearsay, and those are for present sense impressions, you know, or if it's like an excited utterance, right? If you're in a state of emergency, you go, ah, and you say something because it's an excited utterance, those might be exceptions to hearsay because they're reliable. The problem with hearsay is it's unreliable because people can make up anything. But if it's right in the heat of the moment, we say it's more reliable. Let's listen.
Certainly, so we would move to have them admitted into the record under those exceptions, Your Honor.
Any objections?
Your Honor, Christina Ford on behalf of the governor-elect.
Pretty sure she's working for the Elias Law Group. Remember her name previously?
We do object to these coming in. There are more than, I believe, 50 pages of these texts, and one text out of 50 pages that potentially qualifies for an excited utterance doesn't make up for 50 pages of text from this day of otherwise out-of-court statements that they're trying to enter for the truth of the matter.
Your Honor,
Go ahead.
I also submitted them, sir, with under the present sense impression. These are real-time messages, text messages that are being typed in as the events are unfolding, the day of election, and I believe it falls under that exception as well.
Okay. I'm going to allow them because I think that they
Good.
represent is the correspondence back and forth between the techs who are working with their immediate impressions of trying to resolve the problem. So
That's great. That's really a good win, I think. I think that the judge will see 50 pages of text messages showing what a catastrophe the actual election was. So pretty amazing. Now, as we continue, we'll see that there are other questions that are being posed, and he had a lot of stuff to say. So this guy was a great witness. He was very clear that it was chaotic. It was a mess. There was stuff all over the place, and you believed him, right? He had really seemed credible to me, and his text messages back it up, not trying to hide much. But the problem comes back to the way the laws are written. Now, listen to this cross-examination from this very interesting person. If this video loads, why is it not loading? Let's try it again. All right, well, we'll let that load here for a minute. I can pull it up another way. Videos are being a little bit finicky, but I think I have this one right here.
I understand from your testimony and from your declaration in this case that you held...
Oh, it just loaded as soon as I got the other version up. All right, so this is the defense lawyer for the government, for Katie Hobbs and everybody who says it's a perfect election. She asks this guy very pointed, very specific questions.
I understand from your testimony and from your declaration in this case that you helped set up equipment in preparation for Election Day.
Correct.
You didn't intentionally cause the tabulators to reject ballots, correct?
No, actually, we weren't even specifically focused on the tabulators with our position.
Intentional?
And you don't know of any other T-techs who intentionally caused the issue?
They were temporary employees, so...
Oops, you can't see what I'm listening to.
T-techs that caused that.
Let's play that again. You couldn't see what I was listening to.
I understand from your testimony and from your declaration in this case that you helped set up equipment in preparation for Election Day.
Correct.
You didn't intentionally cause the tabulators to reject ballots, correct?
No, actually, we weren't even specifically focused on the tabulators with our position.
And you don't know of any other T-techs who intentionally caused the issue?
They were temporary employees, so I don't know of any T-techs that caused that issue. No.
And you said here today that you were hired along with your other T-techs to help resolve problems that were occurring at polling locations, correct?
Yes, that was part of it, the setting up of sites along with resolving problems when they arose.
And then you were in fact deployed to help resolve these issues when they did spike up, correct?
Yes.
All right, and the rest of it was basically like that. You didn't cause this, right? You didn't know anybody who caused this, and actually, it sounds like you were deployed to help fix this. Oh, so it sounds like we actually had a remedial plan in place, and it sounds like our client, you know, Katie Hobbs and the board of directors and Maricopa County, Stephen Richard, and onesie twosie Bill Gates, all of them were very, you know, really trying to fix this, in fact, and they hired you, and you out there deployed it, and didn't you fix it, you know, and all that type of stuff. But do you see what she's doing? It has nothing to do with literally anything else. Has nothing to do with the text messages, has nothing to do with the chaos that he discussed. It has everything to do with the very pointed check boxes. That's it. So we'll go revisit those after our final witness for the day, which was Mark Sonneclar. Mark Sonneclar was a lawyer for the Republican National Lawyers Association, or some an association like that. I don't know the title officially, but he's our final witness of the day, and he's explaining that he was running around, right? He's part of the lawyer observer team that is monitoring these polling places and these tabulation centers, and it is absolute chaos. The question to him is about the severity of this, right? The magnitude. Is this just a minor thing? Like, it's just, you voted for a long time. You've obviously been doing this work for a bit of time, and tell us your experience here. Was this just a blip?
I believe you mentioned that you visited personally about 10 vote centers.
Yes.
And that the other roving attorneys that you were working with, it was a total of about 115 vote centers in total.
Yes.
And that's 115 out of about, I think, 223 vote centers, correct?
That's correct.
So that's a little over half of the vote centers.
I believe it was 52%.
How are
52%.
you able to characterize what your the other roving attorneys were experiencing, whether it was similar to what you were experiencing, or worse, or maybe not as bad? How would you characterize?
Well, I would say that most of the roving attorneys had a similar experience to mine. I can't think of one that had a different experience. There may be, but for the most part, you know, aggregated together, pretty much everyone had the same experience.
And if somebody were to characterize the events of that day as minor technical difficulties that should be expected in any election, what would you say to that?
I would say that's nonsense. When you have 132, we've been able to document that there were at least 132 vote centers with tabulator problems out of 227, which comes out to about 59%. I don't see how that could be characterized as a small matter.
I agree with that completely. It is not a small matter. It's a catastrophe in modern American election history, and they're trying to paper over this like it's no big deal. So that was the evidence presented today, a short sped up version of the trial. And as a reminder, we covered a lot of ground. We talked about Stephen Richer. He's the person who explained that he's really just the recorder. He delegates a lot of this stuff down. Scott Jarrett does some testing, but he didn't have much information for us. He didn't even do any testing. He kind of seemed shocked after the 19 inchers discovery was revealed. We checked in with Mr. Clay Parikh, who was revealing to us that they were in fact using alternative ballots that were smaller in size, and that the only way that those changes could have been made was with intentional setting changes, literally, either changing them on the application side or changing them on the device side. Whatever the change was, right, there should be logs, there should be all sorts of evidence and material that would reveal that. We'll see if any of that comes out at any time, but it wasn't presented there today. We also had Heather Honey, who has a background as an investigator and auditor. She talked a lot about the chain of custody, explained the background in analysis. We saw the flow chart, and she said we were missing evidence, right? We actually didn't even see any of these election day documents. They just didn't provide the receipts. Runbeck says they don't exist, and Maricopa County says they were misplaced. We got a little new evidence from this election day worker who had revealed to us the text messages that showed absolute chaos and madness on election day. And we heard from Mark Sonneclar, who confirmed that as well, a lawyer who did observation back during election day. So a lot of evidence. How does it all add up? Remember, we have to go back to our guideposts, to our checkposts, and ask ourselves how they work under the law. So as a reminder, as to count 2, we had the different counts, and so we can see what the law says. The question that the judge says must be proved at trial is the following. Count 1, whether the malfeasant person was a covered person. Okay, so we actually need a person. We need a name. We need some sort of evidence of an individual. We didn't see that today. The printer malfunctions caused by this individual, that person again was not named, resulted in identifiable lost votes, and these votes could have affected the outcome of the election. So unfortunately, even though there was a ton of evidence, it was broad enough, I think, that it's going to be difficult for the defense to argue that there was a malfeasant person who was directly causing identifiable lost votes. Do you see how connected those dots have to be? Extremely connected. This is almost like having to prove a crime, okay? This standard is so high that it's going to be extremely difficult for Kari Lake to meet it. She would have to do the job of a prosecutor. Find that there was a person with intentionality who committed essentially a crime, right? Because they inserted malfunctions that caused lost votes. These votes would have affected the outcome of the election. I think it's a tall order. And even though we saw a lot of evidence here today, heard a lot of theories, and had a lot of after the fact evidence, you can see the evidence of it. You can see there were 19-inch images being printed on 20-inch ballots. We see all of it. We can see that Maricopa County didn't provide receipts, according to Miss Honey. But what does that have to do with this statute? We're still looking for a person. We're still looking for printer malfunctions caused by that person, and that there were identifiable lost votes. So what bucket of votes were, what specific bucket, and how what of those votes affected an outcome, an election outcome. There's a question asked about why does it have to be like a crime? It's not exactly like a crime, but it is talking about a malfeasant person. Okay, so this is somebody who's sort of intentionally screwing something up, right? Manipulating the process, and that it actually caused lost votes, and that those lost votes would have affected the outcome. All right, so not just a small possibility of votes, an actual identifiable bucket of votes that's larger than 17,000 votes. It's very specific. This is why the defense lawyer came out and said, are you the malfeasant person? No, literally, are you the malfeasant person? Did you do this? Do you know anybody that did? Did you cause these malfunctions? No. Okay. Well, that's it. All right, well, let's take a look at the next one. So I'm not optimistic on that one. Let's take a look at the next one, count 4. Here, Kari Lake has to argue that the ability of the employees to add ballots is a problem and that the inbound receipt of the delivery is misconduct. And let's actually read some of the rest of that, because I wanted to see what else the judge had for us. Minute entry regarding the under advisement ruling. All right, so let's check out count 4 with a little bit more detail while we're here doing some post-trial analysis. If we go into count 4, the ballot chain of custody, the judge tells us that these two things are problematic. Employees could drop their ballots in the buckets, and there was no inbound receipt, as we heard from Ms. Honey. The judge says, if the court draws inferences in a light most favorable to Kari Lake, if she finds that a stated claim of misconduct has affected the canvass, then it may be possible to move forward, right? So it's not just about the fact that those things may have happened. It's also going to be that it affected the canvass. This is true as to whether the lack of compliance was both intentional and did in fact result in a changed outcome. Yeah, okay. So plaintiff has stated a claim, so that count will move forward too. And I think they're going to run into the same roadblocks that they're going to run into on count 1. Basically, all of the conclusions are going to come down to, did it actually affect the outcome, right? It's going to be that question over and over and over again. And so Kari Lake has one additional witness to drop tomorrow. I know many of us were sort of excited to see Katie Hobbs. I know I was. Katie Hobbs, I was really excited to see her testimony. We didn't get that. We got Stephen Richer, but not Katie Hobbs. Unfortunately, we saw that Kari Lake's lawyers, Blem Law, this morning, or yesterday afternoon, actually, at 3:59 is when this got filed. But they filed a notice of withdrawal for a subpoena. So Kari Lake is not officially asking for Katie Hobbs to testify. So she will not be there tomorrow. We've got notice of withdrawal of the subpoena submitted by Kari Lake's lawyers on the 20th of December so that Katie Hobbs did not have to appear. Now, I thought that was kind of interesting. You know, the judge may have granted that anyways, but I did think it was interesting that they sort of acquiesced on it and didn't let the judge make that ruling for them. But all right, so that's that. We also have some updated minute entries. We can do a refresh on here and see what the latest filings are. So it looks like Richard Barris is the pollster extraordinaire who's on Twitter, on YouTube. I think he's got a live show. He's got a YouTube channel. So definitely go check out Richard Barris. He does great work. And I think he does doesn't he do a Barris with Barnes, or Barnes and Barris or something like that? I think they did something like that at one point. Anyways, so go check out Richard Barris. Evidently, he's testifying tomorrow, and they're fighting over about his testimony. And Kari Lake yesterday filed a response. The defense, the government, didn't want him to come and testify. And so it should be short testimony because the defense is really running out of time. They had about 4 hours and 30 minutes on the clock, and we'll see what they get to tomorrow. But they've got closing arguments. The government's case in chief is going to go tomorrow. They told us that they had 4 witnesses. And so, of course, we'll see what that all looks like. But that, my friends, is it for day 1 of the Kari Lake trial. We did cover a lot of ground, as you can see. A whole handful of witnesses. Tomorrow, we'll get some defense witnesses in the house. And I do hope you join us. Of course, I do know that Viva and Good Logic are the 2 places to be. And, you know, split your time evenly amongst the 2 actually open both of them up at the same time. Whatever you're watching, but you can watch them both. They both have astute commentary. You don't want to miss a minute of it. But after you're watching their live streams in multiple tabs and the show's over with them, come back over to here and we'll hit up the recap on the government's case. We'll see what the judge had to say. We'll do something very similar to today. So if you missed the full day of trial, you can come back here and we'll dive right into it. But now let's take a look at your comments and see what you have to say about all of this activity and more. I see K Bean just dropped one for us. Says, does Hobbs' interference on Twitter matter at all? No, not according to the two charges that we just saw. Right? It's literally, K Bean, it's literally those check boxes. All right. Like if it says about those things. Let's pull that back up. Did I close that? No, that was the subpoena withdrawal. Yeah, it's literally like a checkbox. So I don't know what I did with it, but if it's not on that checkbox, if it doesn't tick that box, then it doesn't count, unfortunately. So that's the problem, right? If it's so like obvious, it still doesn't hit the element, I guess is what I'm saying. You got to check the box. All right. Lost my train of thought. I'm looking at all these super chats here. You can see, okay, we've got several of them. We'll come back to you, K Bean. We had another one from Quicks. Says it's pronounced OSINT. OSINT. Okay, there it is. OSINT is how I usually say it. Just like I say Andy NGO. Yeah, because some of these things are complicated. So OSINT is OSINT. Thank you for all you do. Well, thank you, Quicks. And I appreciate that. And Quicks, I think, did you give us the SYN-AC acknowledgement yesterday? I think you did. I appreciate that. Donna Stokes is here. Says, hey, before you head on out of here, I see the chat's bailing out. I appreciate you hitting that like button. And we'll be back here tomorrow as well. Thank you, Donna, for reminding me to make that mention. Think witnesses 1, 2, and 4, says Jonathan, proved intentionality in the 1920 ballot imaging. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I agree with that. But the problem is we don't know who. Like, who made that change, right? That, Jonathan, that's the missing component. We're missing, obviously, I think it's either like a colossal error of gross negligence to not have the right printer paper selected, essentially. But we're missing the other components. We're missing the person. We're missing the confirmation that it would have changed the outcome of the election. We're missing the identifiable bucket. So I think the judge is going to drop him on all of those. But I do think that your point is not really about that. Your point is about intentionality. And I think that, yeah, I mean, I think, so I didn't listen to much of their defense, but how do you, I mean, if that is true, right? If it's 19-inch images on 20-inch ballots, that's why, I know that. That's why whenever I try to print an envelope, it doesn't work, right? It's like, you dummy, it's not that size. It's not A7, it's not A4, whatever it is. Like, I have no idea what these things are. It's a nightmare. So thank you, Jonathan. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong on all this. K Bean says, could Lake appeal if she loses? Yeah, she certainly could appeal. The problem is they're running out of time, right? Yeah, I think you can appeal everything. I think if she loses the appeal, she'll lose because the judge didn't find enough evidence to support those claims. And so she'd have to appeal on, a legal issue, not that that she disagreed with the facts. So we'd have to identify something that's appealable. And I don't know that we've seen anything yet. I mean, although there's been a lot of rulings, has the judge excluded anything? Like, the judge would have to exclude something or admit something or prejudice them in some way or do something that's an appealable issue. And I don't know if the judge has. And again, KB, and you were here for all of the 2020 stuff, right? And remember how many appeals we covered, and they just don't want to touch it. Once you get past the finish line, it makes it really hard to undo it. Thank you, KB. Two of them. Thanks, KB, today. Tori is here. Tori Dietrich is here. Or Dietrich. What's up, Tori Dietrich? Says, thank you, Robert. Hobbs is treasonous. I just hope they can prove her and her cronies' criminality. Yeah, I mean, that's almost what they're asking Kari Lake to do, right? Is to say that there was a person or a conspiracy group of people who went and manipulated these things. But nobody's even looking into it, right? It's over. Like, is there an attorney general investigation into this 19-inch ballot? Is the Arizona legislature going to appoint like a election committee, like a select committee or something? Can we even do that here? Do we have the power to create fake committees out of nowhere and appoint idiots like Liz Cheney to run them? To go investigate these things? If we have that power, we should do it. Actually, if we don't even have that power, we should do it because they didn't have the power. even under their own rules, they were supposed to have a certain number of people on that committee, and they weren't on there. So I guess it doesn't matter. So I guess maybe that's what we can do in Arizona, is just form a committee and investigate people, you know. But Kari Lake is essentially expected to prove that criminality, that there was malfeasance, that it impacted the outcome of the election. Everybody else just rubber stamped it. Ducey's like, nope, you're good to go. You know, I think that a lot of the Republicans here in Arizona would rather see their team lose if it means that they don't get the starting spot. Does that make sense? If you're on the team and you don't get to start, you want your whole team to lose. So if Kari Lake gets a starting position, the Republicans are going to be so sourpussed out in Arizona that they'd rather just forfeit the game, which is basically what they did, rather than having their team win, right? They'd rather see the other team win, the Democrats win, than Kari Lake have a good game. It's pathetic. So I agree with you, Tori. We also have K. Bean says, does Hobbs' interference on Twitter matter at all? I don't think so. I mean, I think that may have gone, K. Bean, now that I'm thinking about it a little more deeply, to the first count, which was the freedom of speech count. She actually brought that up in her complaint, and the judge dismissed that count. So it's sort of excluded from the conversation. Now, if something like that interfered with the printer, and the print, or that interference fit in with one of those other counts, then it could come in, but I don't think so, right? The judge is good. The reason the judge wrote that opinion is he gave us very clear guideposts. Like it's a paint by numbers book. And if I were running this case, I would be running defense on this case, I would be running it exactly how that woman was running it today. Did you intentionally do this? Are you a person? Did you know any person in here at all? Have you identified a person here? And they really haven't. So it's going to be a tough hill. We'll see what they've got for us tomorrow. And I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer for everybody. I mean, I live in Arizona. I mean, I got to go through this crap. Are you kidding me? I've got more skin in the game than many, because I got to live under the Hobbs regime and the Mark Kelly regime and whatever Kirsten Sinema happens to be on any given day. Got to live here, man. Might have to go out there and hang out with Eddie Oliver, move to the great state of Texas, man. Then he can stop blaming me for all of Arizona's problems. Gosh. All right. And so that, my friends, is it for us on the day. We are going to stick around and do a little bit of an after party over at watchingthewatchers.locals.com. But before we wrap it up, let's say thank you to our amazing sponsors over at 4patriots.com and, of course, our law firm here in Arizona. We had an amazing holiday party today. Part of the reason I couldn't hop on Good Logic or anybody's stream is because we were at our office. We had an awesome holiday party. We had the Grinch who came by. Did I save one of these pictures? I think I did. Here, let's see if we can share just a quick holiday photo. Where the heck did these go? Here's our office party with the holiday Grinch in the house. You can see this is our amazing team at the R&R Law Group. That's what we do. Having a holiday celebration. The Grinch has his hand right on my head. We had a lot of fun. We have an awesome team. And the reason I share that with you is so that if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who has been charged with crimes, we can help. That's the team of people that work super hard to go and help you survive difficult times, trials, and tribulations. And so if you happen to know anybody in the state of Arizona who needs some help, let us know. 480-787-0394. We offer free case evaluations, and we help good people charged with crimes find safety, clarity, and hope. And also, don't forget to go to 4patriots.com and get your survival food, because we don't want anybody out there starving to death, or solar panels or whatever else you need. All right, but that, my friends, is it for us. We're going to head on over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. My friends on Locals, hang tight. We'll be back in about 30 seconds. Everybody else on YouTube, my friends on Rumble, let's give some shout outs to the Rumble. Larry One's over there. It says, thanks, Rob. Thank you, Larry. Mixter Zancap is over there, along with Dog Digger. Vicky Dreams is in the house. 1R5, Jan X there, along with Backwards World. And our friends over on YouTube, I forgot to say thank you to the mods. The mods always mod the fort down for us. And I see the mods chatting away. Shout outs to K Bean is in the house. I see Just Cause is over there. Shout out to Playin' Hooky. We've got Lean. We have Ronnie Cole, Zulu. I didn't see Vienticus here today. I don't know where he's at. But Ronnie Cole, Zulu, shout out to Geomancy, and all of the other mods who mod down the fort for us. We are grateful for your help. But we are now going over to watchingthewatchers.locals.com. And if you'd like to join us, I hope to see you there. Otherwise, we'll be back here tomorrow to break down Kari Lake. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already so that we don't miss each other next time. And I look forward to seeing you right back here so that together with your help, we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency down upon our system with the hope of finding justice. Have a tremendous evening, my friends. Sleep very well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow.